It's Emil Guillermo. Emil, I'm up to you. If you're watching, you notice I have my Filipino Golden State Warriors t-shirt underneath my Filipino gong. They lost to the Suns last night. I know I should have been doing something else. There's like any number of things I could have been doing, but it was the first game of the season. And, they were playing the Suns, Kevin Durant. It was a good game. It looked like maybe Charles Barkley was right. The Warriors were cooked at the half. Could you say that? No, you can't say that at halftime. And the Warriors came back. Chris Paul looked good. Would you have rather had Jordan Poole making misses and throwing the ball away, or Chris Paul making misses and making good passes and not creating turnovers? I thought the Warriors looked good, except they couldn't convert in the final minutes, right? Kuminga missed 2 free throws. Thompson missed some shots and free throws. It didn't go down. And they're playing the Suns, and the Suns didn't have Bradley Beal, right? Bradley, who's a great all-star. But, hey, they came back, made it competitive toward the end. So, not the result we wanted to see if you're a Warrior fan. But it's going to be crazy the next month or so, right? Because you have football, you got basketball, you got ice hockey, you got the World Series. And the World Series, I refuse to, and I don't really like the Arizona Diamondbacks because they're in the same division as the Giants, right? And that would mean saying, yeah, they were better than the Giants. But the Giants, you want to see someone else from another division, because then, it keeps you from saying, well, that could have been us. It could have been the Giants. They were just, you can't build a championship roster or a championship team based on so-so players who have to rely on having career years each and every year. You can't have a career year each and every year. So anyway, congratulations to the Arizona Diamondbacks. That means Madison Bumgarner, even though he's no longer with the Arizona Diamondbacks, he's not with any team, but he was with the team for the beginning of the year, and so he can win a World Series ring. Will it happen against the Texas Rangers? Well, we have another Giants rooting interest in the Texas Rangers, and that would be Bruce Bochy, the manager, and also Marcus Semien, right, the infielder who's played with the A's from San Francisco. So there's lots of rooting interest. I lived in Dallas. I noticed one paper called them Suburban Dallas's baseball team because you're in the Metroplex. They're in the mid cities area. Richardson. So I think I have a slight lean toward the Texas Rangers, and I hope Bruce Bochy wins. A lot of people talking about, wow, that would have been the manager for us. Giants got a manager, Bob Melvin, who may or may not be a good choice. He knows the system. He's an alum. It's like being in the family. The thing is, something happened in San Diego that didn't smell right. And was that Melvin's fault, or was it the fact that you buy millionaire or multimillionaire baseball players who don't always produce? They get big heads, and they don't show up when you need them. I mean, that certainly was the case with Philadelphia last night. Philadelphia just, Bryce Harper, 7th inning. I left the game of the 7th inning to watch the Warriors because I figured out the Phillies will score. I came back, they didn't score. Oh, in that Philly game, if you're an old Giants fan, you always say, oh, Zach Wheeler. What could have been? Zach Wheeler. Okay, now I'm talking like an old sports hack, right? Anyway, this is Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. We talk about sports. I mean, it's sort of top of mind. Sports is the big distraction when the world is falling apart, and the world is falling apart. There does seem to be a slight slowdown with the ground war, or the entry of Israel into Gaza with a ground war, because as reports are saying since the weekend, actually as early as say Monday, that if there's going to be a slowdown, there's going to be a slow. We pray for a slowdown, because if there's a slowdown, there at least people are talking. People are talking. Okay, I got to put up the banner. What we're talking about today. I'll talk a little bit about the speakership. Talk about a story that a friend in Israel sent me about a Filipino hero. Interesting story. Corky Lee. Got to talk about Corky Lee a little bit. They put up a Corky Lee street sign. They named the street after Corky Lee in Chinatown. And I think it's great. You know, I noticed they do this a lot in the East Coast. Like in Boston, they don't name a street after you. They name a square. They give you a square. So you get 4 corners, and they call it, oh, this is your square. And they name them after, in the small towns, small suburban towns around Boston, and I guess for the big, the bigger cities too, they name them for fallen veterans in our wars. I was in a town, Alston, which is right next to Cambridge, across the river, and a number of little towns, little squares, just an intersection. They don't, that way you don't name a whole street for somebody. You give them an intersection. You say, this is Johnson Square or something. So they should do that here more, because then you wouldn't have to have a whole street, right? Like Army Street was changed for Cesar Chavez Street, and everyone all throughout the street had to get new stationery. I mean, that usually is the concern, right? So Corky Lee, I salute my friend Corky. Corky Lee, if you don't know who Corky Lee is, he was the self-appointed photographic laureate of Asian America, which means he was at every event. He took pictures of everything. If there was an Asian American event within 100 miles of New York, he'd be there with his camera taking pictures. Google Emil Guillermo and Corky Lee. I did a podcast with Corky. You want to hear his voice. New York to the core. A good friend, always there. And my favorite Corky Lee stories, he always pushed me to do things. Like at an AAJA convention, Asian American Journalist Convention, Connie Chung had come back to speak to the crowd. She had been noticeably missing. And who was going to ask her a tough question? Well, we're all journalists, but everyone loved Connie Chung, except me. I mean, I like her, but I was there to ask her a question. Where have you been, Connie? Why have you been dissing the organization? I mean, it's true, though. People go off on their careers, and they don't think about this ethnic thing. They're in the mainstream. Of course, they get in trouble in the mainstream, and people go ethnic. That's what happens. When the going gets tough, the tough get ethnic. And because that's where people rally around you, your community. Anyway, Corky was there to push me forward. When I looked back, I was going to sit down and not say anything. Corky said, get up there. We always think about Corky Lee, and congrats to him and his partner in crime, Karen, and all his family and friends who were there in New York City on Tuesday. I believe it was Tuesday. I saw the notice on Tuesday, where in Chinatown they put up the sign for Corky, and now people are going to be walking by and saying, well, Corky Lee, who's Corky? And I'll be there under the sign saying, here, Google Emil Guillermo and Corky Lee. You'll see the podcast I did with him. Now, I love Corky. And when I did my show in New York in February, a bunch of his friends and his partner Karen came to my show, and I dedicated the show to Corky Lee. I mean, how can you not dedicate a show to Corky Lee? So now he deserved it, and he'll be remembered. And I think everyone should have, if not a street, because maybe streets are too, that's like a whole street, maybe just a square. And like I said, I was in Allston and up in Massachusetts in the Boston area. Recently, I noticed how they named something. This is Summers Square. Or this is blah, blah, blah Square. Named after, and I looked, who is this square named for? It was named for a fallen veteran of World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War. And they should name squares all over. I think that'd be a great idea. Guillermo is spelled Guilllermo. Emil Amok Square. That would be good. All right. So, okay, we took care of the Warriors and Corky, and the big story, though, today, October 25th, this is Larry Itliong Day. This would have been his birthday. It was, let's see, California governor. I think it was Brown. Was it Brown? Could it have been Brown that passed that law? I mean, if it was Jerry Brown, I want to give him credit because, Jerry Brown. Not that people forget Jerry Brown, but I mean, yeah, it was Jerry Brown. Declared October 25th in California, Itliong's birthday, Larry Itliong Day. And that was back in 2015. So 8 years now, we've had Larry Itliong Day. And if there isn't a parade, then go outside and go to Google Larry Itliong, go to his Wikipedia page, go to the entry in history.com, go to the articles. Did you go to Emil Guillermo and Larry Itliong, go to the articles I've written about him, and just parade with your phone walking down the street, honoring Larry Itliong. It's been 8 years. I don't know. I think there's been one or two schools named for Larry. I know they wanted to do something in Stockton. I don't know if they've done it quite yet, but this is the thing. Filipinos are beyond erasure because we haven't been acknowledged to begin with. You always say, oh, they were erased. No, we never got to the point where we needed erasure. We were never acknowledged. And this is why Larry Itliong is a special case in Filipino American history. This October being Filipino American History Month. And that's because when you ask people about Larry Itliong, they say, Larry who? I mean, it's sad. And you ask people about the grape strike. Well, get to the point now where you ask people about the grape strike and they say, the grape strike? Hey, I noticed that there was a shortage on blueberries. Maybe that's why we have a shortage on, is there a shortage on grapes or what? The grape strike, 1965 in Delano, in California. The significance of that grape strike. It was international. They know, people who study labor movements, they looked to that grape strike because it was the merger of civil rights and civil rights. Ag, right? And labor, civil rights. It was the Filipinos led by Larry Itliong. Filipino Americans who came to this country in the 20s. They've been working as migrants all throughout their lives, going up and down the state of California, Imperial Valley, Salinas, Stockton, San Joaquin County. Then they'd go up, they'd follow the crops, and some of them would go up to Alaska, and they'd go to the canneries. And Larry Itliong was called Seven Finger Larry because he lost 3 fingers working the canneries. But Larry was still basically a migrant worker who knew how to lead, who knew how to manage. He led the agricultural workers, AGWOC, it was called, Agricultural Workers Committee, which this was a group of Filipinos who were migrants who essentially aged in the fields. And it came down to the grapes in Delano. And they were making something ridiculous, like under $1. They were making like, actually way under $1. They were making like 48 cents an hour. And they knew they had to strike. And so the Filipinos, and they're all in their 50s and 60s, Itliong, head of the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, AFL-CIO, called for a strike in the packed Union Hall in Delano. He said, I want those in favor to stand up with your hand raised. And John Armington, who I interviewed in Delano back in 2015, he was just a 14-year-old kid. He was there. He saw it. He said, everyone in that hall stood up with their hands in the air. It was a unanimous decision to call a strike against the grape growers in Delano and vicinity. And the walkout began September 8th, 1965, when the growers refused to honor the union's demand for wages of $1.40 an hour. They went out September 8th. And then there was another group in the area, the National Farm Workers Association, or actually, yeah, it was NFWA. It was led by Gilbert Padilla, who with Chavez ran the NFWA, but it wasn't a real union. They had a mimeograph machine and a phone, and that was it. But they had the ear of all these Mexican migrant workers who were coming into America. And the flow of the workforce, it was no longer coming from Asia in terms of these Filipino men who came in the 20s and 30s. There's like 30,000 of them coming from the Philippines because the United States had excluded Chinese and Japanese labor. And so now these Filipino men are in their 60s and 70s and they're going on strike in Delano. They knew they needed help. And those who are around Larry Itliong will say, yeah, they knew if they succeeded, they had to have the Mexicans behind them. And so merger talks began between AWOC, the Ag Workers Group of Itliong, and NFWA, which was Padilla and Chavez's group, which wasn't a union. AWOC was AFL-CIO, but not NFWA. And the merger was brought together by the leadership of Larry Itliong. He knew he had to have them. So he started the strike September 8th in Delano. By September 16th, the NFWA voted to join the strike. And eventually that became the United Farm Workers. Right? Bringing together the Filipinos and the Mexicans, really combining the labor movement with the broader civil rights movement. I mean, that's why you found people like Martin Luther King Jr. attracted to the UFW, Robert F. Kennedy. They were all going to the fields. International attention was drawn when Chavez went on his hunger strike. And this is the snowball effect. The Mexican workers coming into California, they grew the workforce. The aging Filipinos in the field dwindled. And so did Larry Itliong's influence. He left the UFW in 1971 which was just 6 years after the strike, 65. But, I mean, here we are, 2023. When you ask people about the grape strike, when you ask people about the UFW, they'll always say Chavez. They'll always say Cesar Chavez. No one will mention Larry Itliong. And yet, who was the spark? Who was the guy who led the striking workers in the fields? September 8th, Larry Itliong. Who was the guy who brought together the mass that the union needed to win in the fields? Larry Itliong. Now, not to take anything away from Chavez. Chavez didn't even want to strike. Chavez, I mean, there were Filipinos were like really aggressive. You know, they were tough. Itliong used to smoke a cigar, and his followers would say, you know, Larry wants to strike. He wants to have a picket line. Chavez wants to march to Sacramento behind a Virgin Mary. That's not a strike. I mean, that was kind of the cultural division between the strikers and the Filipino strikers and the Mexicans. But Chavez kind of made it into this mystical thing, and he drew the attention. But as I said, Filipino Americans and historians in these later years have looked to the strike and looked at what happened, and they say it's time. It's time to give Larry Itliong recognition. I mean, he was a force. And back in 2015, there was the 50th anniversary of the Delano grape strike, and it was very heartening to see people like Paul Chavez, the son of Cesar Chavez, get up in front of the crowd and say, you know, I hope, you know, this is a small thing to get up in front of the crowd and to acknowledge Larry Itliong. But, you know, it was important for him to do, and he did it. He said there are names lost in history, and today's ceremony goes a long ways to rectify that. Of course, there are some hard feelings who would not be offended if they felt their contributions weren't recognized. We should now look to recognize these unsung heroes, Latinos and Filipinos alike. And that was Paul Chavez at the Delano Filipino Hall, 2015, 8 years ago, talking about how he wanted to honor Larry Itliong. He wanted to honor Pete Velasco and Philip Veracruz, two other labor union leaders who stayed. But even they didn't get the kind of credit that Chavez got. And yet it was the Filipinos who really were the heart and soul. Velasco, Philip Veracruz, and chief among them, Larry Itliong. So today's Larry Itliong Day. That's what you need to know about Larry Itliong. And I swear, just like any point in Filipino American history, all you have to do is like go up to a bar and say, hey, who started the grape strike? And people will say, oh, you got to give them some credit if they say Chavez, because most people will say, oh, I don't know. But if they say Chavez and expect to win the bar bet, then you come back over the top and say, no, it was Larry Itliong. Yeah, I'll just take that top shelf scotch like that I can't even pronounce right now, but it has some kind of name. You know, that scotch. Don't give me the Johnny Walker. Don't give me the blend. Give me the pure. So, Larry Itliong. And you can Google some of the stories that I've done on Larry. I was actually kind of pleased that I'm a citation in history.com on the story of Larry Itliong. And if you go see Larry, he's got that big cigar in his mouth. And he was the man. He was the man. And one of the things I like about Larry Itliong is, very outspoken. And he would say these not necessarily crazy things, but he did not back down. Salt to the earth kind of guy. He said, "Look, I don't need big car. I don't need big money. I can make a living and just get by on rice and tomatoes and pusit. That's a squid, right? Simple Filipino life. Smoke my cigar." And so we honor him today. One of the things they were trying to do, name some schools, name some libraries, something after Larry. I don't know how haven't heard of many places, but we all know about Cesar Chavez, right? Chavez Army Street in San Francisco renamed for Chavez. And I think it's important to just remember them all, because there will come a day when people will be scratching their heads even about Chavez, saying, "Oh, who is this guy?" But we have to. These are our guys. These are our Latinx heroes, Chavez. So in bringing up Itliong, I don't intend to bring down Chavez. My intention is to say it was all of us together moving the great obstacles before us, right? I mean, that's the truth. And it's just a shame when, because of the way the mainstream narratives are handed down, sometimes you don't hear about all the others. You only hear about, in the case of the grapes, like Chavez. Don't hear about Itliong. But Itliong was definitely there. Definitely Itliong was there. I'm trying to find a couple other things about Itliong on just things that I've written about him. Because, there's just a lot of ignorance about, Larry, and, on a day like today, we honor his birthday. We try to say, oh, yeah, this is why Larry Itliong is important. Larry Itliong, let's see. I wrote this 2023. No, 2020 I wrote this. No, I don't want to read that. Let's go with this one. Yeah. This one here. How about this one? No, that's not the one either. Anyway, one of the things about Larry Itliong, man, there's a tape of Larry Itliong speaking before students at UC Santa Cruz in 1976. Boy, I was still at Harvard, but what a treat it would have been to see Larry Itliong at UC Santa Cruz. It was an Asian American history class. They didn't have Asian American history at Harvard. They're just getting Asian American history off the ground this year at Harvard, after like a $40 million endowment donation. And that's how it works. But Larry Itliong in this tape, before Asian American students at UC Santa Cruz in 1976 said, "A lot want to buy me off. One of the biggest organizations that I grew up with in this country offered me $200,000. They said, Larry Itliong, we know you need money. You're doing a good job in California. We'll give you $200,000 to do whatever you want to do." And then they said the money would be yours if you're going to help Cesar Chavez run the service center. And Itliong pauses and says, just the implication that I'm supporting Chavez, they want to give me $200,000. And this was after he left the United Farm Workers Union early as VP to Chavez. I mean, he could have stayed on, but he left. It was as if the union acknowledged that Chavez, who really didn't know union organizing, he knew how to organize a rosary. He knew how to organize a prayer, but he didn't know how to be a union leader. He was kind of like this spiritual guy, which is good. But unions, they're tough guys, like Larry Itliong. And they acknowledged that Chavez needed Itliong to unify the two biggest groups in the fields, the Mexicans and the Filipinos. And so here comes this offer of $200,000. And Itliong says, you know what I tell them? I don't need that $200,000. I can eat rice and pusit, bagong, mango. I don't need $200,000. And the young Pinoys, the students, were amazed by his refusal. He said, and then Itliong just looked at him and said, I said, $200,000 to sell out my countrymen? I figure we have about 350,000 Filipinos in California. That's only 200,000. That's not even $1 a head. No, I don't want your money. If I want to sell out my countrymen, then give me 50 million. I'll take it. And that's my favorite Larry Itliong story. I love that story. He was offered 200,000. He said, give me 50 million. Larry Itliong. We honor Manong Larry. I call him Manong. A lot of people say, oh, he should be Uncle Larry, Emil. Oh, some people like to go the uncle route, the Tito, Tita, And some of us are just Manong. Hey, Manong, Manang. We're... So Itliong, I think the lesson to me is he would never sell out his fellow Filipinos. Never. And so that's a lesson worth pondering, learning on Filipino American History Month. All right. So I'm, watching the whole, watching what's going on with Israel and Hamas. I mean, a lot of people call it the Israel-Gaza war because I've seen someone mention it as Israel-Gaza war because Gaza is the strip that is governed by Hamas. I like the initial description, the Israel-Hamas war. Because if you say Israel-Hamas war, you are really being, how do we say it? You're really making the distinction that Hamas is different from Gaza, the land, and the Gazans, who are, Palestinians and Arab and some Israelis. And because the perpetrator of the violence was Hamas. And they're the ones that that Israel is going after. Unfortunately, it's hard because Hamas sticks its headquarters underneath hospitals. They're not really, they're governors of Gaza, but everything that's happening to the Gazans, you can blame the Israelis, but I think you can equally blame the leadership of Hamas because of their beliefs on how they view life. I say that I saw this tape on MSNBC, and it just kind of crystallizes when a Hamas leader, or perhaps that should be an Hamas leader, says, "Oh, the difference between the Jews love life. And Hamas, we love to be martyrs. We'll give up our life for our land." Once you hear someone say that clarifies, oh, that's the Hamas view. That's who Israel's fighting. And the whole idea of a ground war, if it's to happen, is to eliminate Hamas. Not easy, which is why there's some slowdown, because there's some negotiations. Look, we'll take any option that gets us to peace. I think peace is the option. So we're just waiting to see, the airstrikes are still happening. There's some talk about more negotiations for hostages. Meanwhile, a friend of mine gives me a story that appeared in Israel. Headline: Filipino caregiver paid off terrorist, saved herself and 95-year-old client, I believe is next, 95-year-old employer. And it's a picture of Nitza Hefetz, who is in a wheelchair, and her caregiver, Camille Gisalva, who's a 31-year-old Filipina. And this was in the Times of Israel. A quick-thinking Filipino caregiver, there are about like 50,000 of them in Israel, saved her life and that of her 95-year-old employer, Nitza Hefetz, on October 7th by giving a Hamas terrorist who had broken into their Gaza border home the savings she had prepared for a planned trip to the Philippines 2 days later. I opened my wallet and told him to take everything I had, which was about $370, just to save myself and Nitza. The caregiver, Camille Gisalva, told the Ynet news site. I showed him the plane ticket, and asked him not to take that. The terrorist then asked if there was more money in the house in Kibbutz Nirim and walked around the property with Gisalva, 31, behind him. He took Gisalva's smartphone and eventually left. It's a miracle that I stayed alive, she told the news organization. I told my mother that I was going to die, and I asked her to send me a picture of my son because I felt I wouldn't get out of this alive. She has not seen her son, who's 7, for a year and a half. Now, this is a sad, sad story. A happy story, but a sad story. It appeared in the Times of Israel, where they're calling the caregiver a hero because she's face to face with a terrorist. She's got a 95-year-old employer there who she is her caregiver. She's got to protect her. She wants to protect herself. Take my money. Don't take my plane ticket. Take my money. $370. And her life was spared. And so was her employer's. But the sad thing that got me when I was reading that story is she hadn't seen her 7-year-old kid in almost 2 years. Because that's the life in the Philippines. You look for a job, you got to leave the country. It's part of that diaspora. And you leave from the Philippines and you go out and you're in Dubai, in the Middle East. The lucky ones can be in Canada, in the U.S., but now most, and even in the 80s, I have relatives who went to the Middle East, and some who stayed. They got married. They're part of the culture now. I think this gives a perspective about Hamas, what they really want, what they really need. I mean, I'm sure some are real zealots and would just kill. Some were just trigger happy, bloodthirsty. But it's poor people struggling. Oh, here's money. I'll take the money. They spared the elderly woman and her Filipino caretaker. They're calling the caretaker a hero. Hefetz's daughter, who's 74, who lives in a kibbutz in northern Jordan Valley, said that her 95-year-old mom is very stressed, acknowledged that her Filipino caretaker, Gisalva, had saved the life of her mother. And now, because of this, the two women just, when the terrorists left and they got the money, the two women just hugged, and Gisalva canceled her flight to the Philippines to stay, because how could she leave? How could she leave? So Camille Gisalva, Filipina caretaker in Israel, being cited as a hero in Israel by the Times of Israel. All right, two other stories I want to mention. I talked about the 60 Minutes story about China and about the Five Eyes. It's being downplayed somewhat. It's not getting the kind of play. It was on 60 Minutes, so it got some play. But I don't know if, and this is part of the rhetoric from the FBI, that China is a real danger. And now, because all the world is in danger, the geopolitical equation is changing. China was courting Russia last week. Now, Christopher Wray, the FBI, is warning everyone about the espionage of China and how it threatens the American way of life. And of course, when he says that, you know what that means. What that means is people start getting alarmed about, Chinese? We got to worry about the Chinese now? I mean, if you're a white person and you hear that, you say, see something, say something. Well, there's a Chinese guy and there's another Chinese woman. I mean, this is how you kick off a wave of xenophobia. And it was almost like a perfect time to do it when the world's worrying about Israel and Hamas and Ukraine. And now here's China, and China's doing what it does. And no one seems to be paying attention. We should be paying attention to Chinese espionage, but we shouldn't be using innocent Asian Americans or putting innocent Asian Americans on the line. And all I know is that in the past, there have been innocent Asian Americans. Not to say that Chinese people aren't spying, but innocent Asian Americans have been caught in this web of xenophobia. And we just have to be careful that we don't repeat that. Because when you see it heralded and mentioned on 60 Minutes, there's got to be a chill in the air. And I just think there are other ways to handle this. Number one, why would you tell the spies? Hey, we're looking at you. We know what you're up to. Why would you tell them? Why don't you just go find them? That sounds like a good idea. Just find the spies. Don't tell them you're up to them because, then you're tipping them off. But just go find them. I mean, that to me, see, and then you don't alarm anybody, especially the general public, because then it's almost like WebMD, right? When you think you're sick, you self-diagnose. Oh, WebMD, I'm dying. You're not dying. You just got a little pain. It's going to go away. Take an aspirin. But now, in the social justice setting, or in the communities out there, because they've seen Christopher Wray on 60, I saw him on 60 Minutes. He says it's threatening the American way of life. Then some guy sees an Asian American with a fancier iPhone and says, he's got better technology than me. He must be a spy. I'm telling you, that's how it happens. Especially if you rely on good old see something, say something. I'm telling you. And if you go to the ALDEF site and go to my column there, aaldef.org/blog, I've written about this over the years, 2013, 2016, back to 2000, the campaign finance laws. Remember that? That was similar. There's Asians giving money. That's foreign money. Oh. Hey, how about if you want to catch the bad guys, don't talk about it. Just go out there and nab them. Don't say, hey, we're coming after you. Hey, we're going to have all these Asians helping us. No, you're going to have Asians being trapped by non-Asians who are now paranoid and want to save their way of life by turning in an Asian. So it's like, this is the soft Asian way. Right? I mean, I hope that doesn't happen. But I think it probably will, because it's happened in the past. All right. The other thing about China to watch out for is that China is bullying the Philippines in the South China Sea. And if you're not aware of that, part of the expansion plans of China isn't just Taiwan. It's the South China Seas, which include the West Philippine Sea. And I'm just telling you, the Chinese rammed a Philippine ship earlier this week. And we're treaty bound. The U.S. is treaty bound to defend the Philippines. So is this just more saber rattling? I just think that we got to be careful, because these are dangerous times. Dangerous times. All right. So I think we cleared our plate here. I went to my high school reunion, and one of the good things about my high school reunion, it was by this area, this Chinese. Well, it was near Daly City, where they have all these Chinese stores, Asian stores. I know there's like a Ranch 99 out where I am. I could easily find some of the greens, but man, you put me in an Asian store that has all these different kinds of greens, I just go crazy. I say, wow. They got leaves from snow peas here. There's just something to me that, having a plate of greens and your bowl of rice and you're picking at your plate of greens, that's heaven. To a vegan like me, yeah, that's heaven. That's what I want to eat all the time. And so when you get exotic greens like yam leaves or this kind of leaf or that kind of leaf, man, I'm telling you, I'm going to have, you just can't find that. You may be lucky to find baby bok choy somewhere. but choy sum, and that's pretty much a basic Asian green. You got to go to Chinatown for that. So I've been eating a lot of greens, which is the funny thing because you find that you go to vegan restaurants and they're so hung up with presentation and other. There's never enough greens. Even a place called Greens, there's never enough greens. And more than just a salad. I'm just talking about greens, leaves. Anyway. All right. Hey, that's it for today's show. Thank you for joining us. Oh, I didn't even mention Speaker Johnson because, you know, he's well-spoken. He is, but he's a Speaker Trumper. The thing about, I mean, why is it that the chief requirement of the Speaker of the House is, did you vote to protect the lie that President Trump really won in 2020? Did you vote to protect the presidency, the illegitimate presidency of the 45th president, Donald J. Trump? Did you vote to try to condemn the election that took the legitimate presidency away from Donald J. Why is that the standard for the Republican Party? It should be, do you vote to uphold the truth and the Constitution and not to perpetrate lies and to, do ill to the United States, its people, the Constitution? No. It's the only thing that got Mike Johnson through is he voted for the steal. And he is an architect or one of the key players in the January 6th insurrection. But he's a little to the left of those real right-wing extremists, which makes him, among some in, the conservative crowd, a moderate. Strange politics in America. The one thing about the Speaker is that the Speaker raises money for the team, right? And this is one thing about Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy, they were showing the amounts of money raised by the Speaker and the amounts of money raised by the other congressmen. McCarthy has raised $28 million, in excess of $20 million the last two Congresses. Johnson, barely at $2 million. This is one of the things about a corporate Congress, a corporate political Congress. It's all about money. It's all about fundraising, which is why we need people who are for the people, really for the people, really for the Constitution, and not talking about corporate interests and not talking about raising money. They should be talking about policy, talking about doing real things for the American people. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. All right, back again tomorrow. This is Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. You can catch me on YouTube at Emil Amok 1. Catch me on Facebook at fb.com/EmilGuillermo.media. Also on Twitter or on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Emil Amok, EMIL-AMOK. Also AMOK.com. I'm doing some upgrades to the website, so might be a little squirrely, but AMOK.com. And also ALDEF to read my columns, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, ALDEF, aldef.org/blog. All right. Google me if all else fails. Thank you for joining us. We like to close with a little meditation. It helps. I have various gurus. I was checking in with one today. He's still around. He's doing something called word power now. Word power. But I like to close with a little metta, a little loving kindness, which goes like this. As I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time. Mahal. Kita.